Hello and welcome back to Safety for Cruisers. My name is Eitan, and today we've got a super interesting episode for you. It is the psychology of emergencies and of emergency management. So what I'm going to try to do today is distill 3 or 4 years of training and 7 or 8 years of experience in handling emergencies into, I'm going to try to keep it under 20 minutes, I promise. And hopefully give you guys some tools to better handle emergencies if they come up. So one of the biggest differences and the most critical aspects of handling an emergency is how the scene commander, call him what you will, the person in charge sets the tone for that event. So you can have two identical calls run by two identical crews with whether it's a fire captain if it's a fire, or a paramedic if it's a medical. You can have everything the same, but if that one leader sets a pace and sets a tone for that event, you can have drastically different outcomes. And even if the outcomes aren't necessarily that different, you can have the feel of the entire event be significantly different to those involved. So as the potential leader in this is going to be addressed a little bit towards kind of the captains and the leaders of the vessels that we're going to be talking about, but it also has some value to the crew. As the captain, we're going to go with captain to make this easier. As the captain, it's your responsibility to set the tone and set the pace of the call so that everybody can, and I apologize if I'm going to say things like call or fire or whatever it is. That's just the terminology of 8 years as a first responder. I can't really get out of my system, but here we go. So as the captain, it's going to be your job to set the pace so that everybody can understand you, execute your instructions, and proceed on to the next task in an efficient way. And one of the most critical things that you can do in order to kind of facilitate that process is to stay calm and to keep things simple. So the saying that every paramedic intern learns as they go into the field for the first time is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you are being methodical, you're being careful, and you're being diligent in everything you do, then even if it might feel like you're going slower and things aren't happening as fast as they should, the methodical fashion in which you're going about things is going to mean that the net result, when everything is all said and done, is going to have been handled in a faster and more efficient way than if you're going at 100 miles an hour and forgetting things and having to go back over and redo things, or God forbid forgetting something and somebody else gets hurt in that response. So slow is smooth and smooth is fast is a mantra that should be going through everybody's head whenever they're in an emergency situation. And along with that mantra, you want to focus on the event, but not lose track of your own physiology. So if something happens, you get a man overboard. You should react immediately, because that's a situation that is very time sensitive, but you also need to be acutely aware that in that second where you see that person go overboard, your pulse just went from 80 to 100 maybe to north of 140 most likely. Your blood pressure just shot up to well above what's healthy and normal for you. Your respiration's increased. You just got a huge dump of epi into your and dope into your system. You just got all of these physiological responses that are kind of triggering you and training you to, it's the fight or flight response. That's what I'm talking about. And that can be well and good because that increases your strength, it increases your reaction time, it sharpens your vision, it does all that. But as the captain, you need to also realize that it narrows your field of vision. You get tunnel vision, and you need to consciously fight the physiological responses that you are experiencing in order to make sure that you are not only doing the, the fastest and the strongest job that you can do, but that you are taking into account all the variables, and that you are responsible for making sure that if you are sending somebody up to the bow to douse the spinnaker, that you're watching to make sure that they stay clipped in, because if they go over, now you have two people in the water, and now you've just effectively doubled the amount of work you have to do and increased your danger factor. So whenever anything happens on board, you see a fire down below, you get a man over, whenever that happens, you want to react immediately, but as you are reacting to that, you want to develop some kind of tactic to keep yourself physiologically centered. So for me, when things start getting weird, I just take one breath. I just do a that only takes 2 seconds, but for me, that's how I take my brain that's run away full throttle, freaking out, trying to get things done, and it brings it back to 80% speed, which is a nice, comfortable jog for me, and that's where I can sustain, and that's how I handle things better. So whether it's breathing, whether it's, you want to just, take your hand, you want to just grab your arm for a second, center yourself that way. You want to develop some habit that's going to keep you centered and keep you functioning psychologically as well as physically. That can be a bit tricky for lay people, because most of the time you're not going to experience traumatic and emergent events that are going to require this kind of reaction as much. Whereas if I'm on a busy ambulance, I might run 20 calls in a 24-hour shift, and every single one of those, however unlikely, has the potential to be serious. And so I get a lot of practice, which is why we're better at it than most lay people. But something that you can do to kind of make up for the lack of experience you may have is to imagine circumstances and imagine events and imagine situations and how you're going to mitigate them. If you're watching this channel, hopefully that's what brought you here, and hopefully I've given you some tools to see how to handle each individual emergency. But the important thing is that for you on your boat, that you are looking around at different things and thinking about, okay, if this through hull ruptures, how am I going to access it? I've got a trash can I'm going to have to move. Is that going to potentially get jammed, or is there going to be something that's going to float in front that might be an obstacle? If there's a fire in the fuel tank, how do I get to my fuel shutoff valve? Is it behind, a bunch of shirts hanging in a locker? Is it nicely open and accessible? You want to be thinking about all of these situations so that you can, if one of them does happen, your brain has some training. So it's just like all first responders go into school for what they're going to be doing. That way, when you first roll up to a second alarm structure and your captain tells you to pull a pre-connector, set up the deck gun, whatever it is, your brain isn't just freaking out and thinking, oh my God, what does he want me to do? You're like, oh, I've done this 50 times. I know this is exactly what I have to do, and you immediately go and do that. So you might not have the physical ability to do that as much as somebody that does it professionally does, but you can psychologically be training yourself. Before we go into what you can do to prep physically, which is going to be drills, I do want to mention one thing, is that you want to be conducting these kind of emergency drills in your head, not just with the equipment, but also with your conditions. So you want to be thinking, say you're on a nice, beautiful wing-on-wing run downwind. Well, this is as we were pulling into Espiritu Santo. We were just wing on wing. It was blowing 8-7 knots. We had our PFDs on, but we weren't clipped in. It was the end of our crossing. It was nice and beautiful, clear weather. And then, as happens here, the wind shifted and picked up, and all of a sudden we found ourselves on a broad reach with 15 knots of wind and full canvas. And as that change happened, and as we jibed the main, and as we did everything, I was sitting there thinking, like, okay, that was different. And then I thought, okay, what if I went overboard right now? What if my crew went over? What if something happened and I realized that, yeah, even though it might be really fun, it was before the seas picked up and we were just blasting along, we were over canvassed and we didn't really have anything to rush. So I thought, there's no reason for this. I'm not being as safe as I can be. So we went ahead and we took a reef in the main. So every time the conditions change, whether it's a sea state, the wind, your vessel, if you notice that, that shroud is kind of moving a lot more, you notice that maybe that chain plate is kind of coming unbedded, you want to be paying attention to that and factoring that into all of the situations that you address. So like, oh man, even if I want to be going really fast, like I should probably baby, our starboard standing rigging right now. So let's go ahead and douse the main, and we're just gonna, go under a partially reefed Genoa, something like that. So that's something you can do to really kind of help yourself prepare for situations, and also to put yourself in a better place if something were to go wrong. Now we're going to go into drills. So drills are super important and super underutilized. I get it. They're a pain. It takes time. You just want to be sailing and then having your happy hour and going to sleep. You don't want to be spending time doing man overboard drills, doing fire drills, whatever it is. But you just have to imagine that if something were to go wrong and the first time that your crew has heard you say man overboard is when somebody goes over the side, the likelihood of that being anything resembling a smooth and cohesive team responding to that incident is essentially zero. Even if people do drills, and even if, there are professional race teams that have lost people over the side, and even though they do drills on a very regular basis and they prep and they study and they work these skills, they've been unable to effect rescues due to the sea state, due to the condition of the vessel, whatever it is. So you need to realize that there's a very good likelihood that things are not going to go smoothly even if you do prepare. So if you don't prepare, you are essentially endangering the lives of not only yourself but also your crew, which you have a responsibility for. So super important to run drills and also to pass on the knowledge that you learn about different situations to them. So I like to do, one of the things that we used to do at the fire station all the time would be we'd table talk. So that would be, you have a target hazard in your district, whether it's a railway station that has hazmat going through, or an oil refinery. You have all these items, and you say, okay, what if a train collided with another train, and one of them had a flammable liquid, say diesel, and another one had a hazmat chemical in it. What is our response going to be? And the captain would pose a scenario, and then the firefighters would go and say, oh, well, I think, we should come up, we should position the rig here, we should do this, we should lay out this gear, this is how we're going to respond. Engineer says his thing, and then the captain says his, and then everyone talks, and it was like, oh, I really liked how you said we were going to go about it this way, and I really liked that you proposed using this piece of equipment in this way, and now you have input from everybody, and you have different angles, and you have a much more thorough analysis of situations and how to respond to them. Same kind of thing goes here. If you're underway, you say, hey, what if I go overboard right now? That's always a huge thing to drill with your crew, is what if the captain is not there? Because I've been on boats where and I'm not the captain, I've been on boats with a chief officer or delivery crew, and I say, hey, what if this happens? What if you go down? What if this is the case? It's like, oh no, don't worry about it. I'll handle it. Like, no, I am worried about it, because whether it's that he's 60 and taking 3 high blood pressure medications and look like he's going to stroke out any minute, or he's young and healthy, and I simply want to see how he has analyzed situations. Prepping your crew for you being incapacitated is a huge thing. So talking about, hey, we are downwind right now, we've got the spinnaker up and the main prevented over. If I go over the side right now, what are you guys going to do? What's the first thing we do? What's our emergency douse procedure for the spinnaker? What's the fastest way to get the main down? If we're, another good thing to tabletop is, what if we're pulling into a marine and the engine dies? That's something more for the captain to think about. But that can be really good training for your crew to think, oh well, what if we what if we steered over and we came up into the wind and hoisted the sail and tried to do X, Y, and Z, or what if we dropped the anchor? You want to get your crew thinking critically so that if you are incapacitated, that they have a chance to not only mitigate the situation but hopefully save your life in the process if you do go overboard, if you are injured. So tabletopping, doing drills, and really encouraging your crew to think about emergency situations and think critically can be super big. The last thing to go into here is communication in emergencies. So in emergencies, everybody gets a little bit dumber. It's just kind of the way that the brain works. You tunnel vision in, your higher functions go next to zero. If it's actually a little bit alarming. Even if you watch trained responders, you say, what's 10 times 12? And like, 120. And they're like, that took 6 seconds. If we were sitting over coffee, you'd have answered that in a fraction of a second. So your reaction time to more higher level cognitive events just goes to hell in a handbasket. So when you are thinking about how you're going to handle emergencies, communication is huge, and making it simple and short and concise. So this is the same thing we do as first responders. We train in closed loop, simple communication. You don't want to tell somebody, oh, go out to the rig, get the stair chair, and would you mind throwing this on this and this? You say, get me the stair chair, bring it back here. Simple, done, easy. Even if it's a brand new firefighter whose first call out of academy, you're like, okay, get stair chair, bring here. I got this. And he goes and does it. Same thing for your crew. If you're up in the cockpit and something happens, you say, hey, go get me the VHF. Why the hell you be getting your VHF from the cockpit? You should have a RAM mic that we talked about, beside the point. Go get me the VHF. Comes back, brings you the VHF. Sheet out the starboard jib sheet. You want to be simple, you want to be concise, and if it's not an action, or it's not an action that you can immediately watch the progression of, if you've got several things, you want to make sure that they are, again, using closed loop communication. So if I say, hey, go close the through hull for the galley sink, that crew member should go down, close the through hull for the galley sink, come back and say, hey, the through hull's closed, what do you want me to do now? That's how you maintain accountability for not only your crew members, but also for the actions that have been accounted for. So if I send somebody down to go close the through hull, and 5 minutes later they're not back up, then I have an extra person to say, hey, I sent John down to close the galley through hull, what's going on? And he goes down and he's like, hey, John's unconscious and bleeding from the head. Maybe he slipped and fell down and hit his head. Now you figured out why. Oh, that loop remained open for too long, got your index of suspicion up, and now you figured out why. So kind of wrapping things up, trying to keep it under 20 minutes here. Big things for prepping for emergencies psychologically is knowing that you're going to get stressed, knowing that you're going to get dumber, and knowing that your crew are always going to be doing the same things. So running drills, tabletopping different emergencies, keeping your communication in the moment of an emergency simple and closed loop is going to make a huge difference in how well you're going to be able to respond to an event. A good way to practice that closed loop communication and all of these skills is to do them every day. Instead of just kind of rambling like, oh, would you mind going and checking the dinghy and doing this? You say, hey, go make sure that the dinghy is riding on the tow line well, make sure that you can't see any water in it, and come back and let me know. That's going to get you a much faster and more efficient response than a suggestion. Last thing before we close down here is make sure that your orders are understood as orders, and your questions are understood as questions, and your suggestions are understood as suggestions. Get into the habit of being clear and concise and differentiating, go sheet the main in right now, go douse the spinnaker, go do X, go do Y, is different than, hey, would you mind doing this? Would you mind getting me a coffee? You want to make sure that you're differentiating and you're using your communication in the most appropriate and effective way possible.